everyone. Welcome to another Ashram Talks discussion. Today, we're going to explore the difference between pain and suffering. Pain is a part of life, it's inevitable, but what if suffering were optional? We're going to learn how to approach pain more skillfully and learn how to work with it rather than against it. So, to guide us in this discussion, we have author and Oxford scholar Simon Haas. Welcome again, Simon.
Thank you so much. Very excited to be here today.
Yeah, absolutely. We're really excited to explore this topic, so the stage is all yours.
So we'll start with the traditional Mangalacharana, as we've been doing for previous episodes. And then we'll turn our attention to chapter 2 of verse 14 of chapter 2. He Shri Guru Jnanadadina Bandho Swananda Dataha Karunaika Sindho Brindavana Nahitavatara Prasiddha Radha Pranaya Prachara. So we open our with this invocation, this traditional mantra. We open our the small Gita study group, our circle of wisdom, and before we move directly to verse 14, I would like to spend a little bit of time focusing on a certain feature of the Bhagavad Gita as a text. And this relates very much to chapter 2, because we begin to see this feature of the text right in this specific chapter. So we might think of the Gita as a traditional text, a conservative or even a conformist text. But actually, in its time, the Bhagavad Gita was really very much a subversive and radical text. And that might come as a surprise. And we begin to see this in chapter 2. So one way to look at this is the various concepts and categories that are defined in the Gita. There are many kind of informal definitions that we find in the Gita, sometimes even of the same term. So for yoga, for example, is redefined a number of times as we make our way through chapter 2 and the chapters that follow. So what the Bhagavad Gita does is it upends established concepts and categories. And one example, which we'll see over coming episodes, is the definition of a sannyasi, someone who has renounced the world and become like they've disengaged from life. It's a final stage in a person's life where they give up everything and lead a life of renunciation. A yogi as well. Generally, a yogi or yogini is someone who has disengaged from the world and who will live either in the forest or on the the outskirts of a village or a town, removed from everyday engagement. So in the Gita, we find that these categories are appended. So both a sannyasi and a yogi are defined, they're redefined, you can say, as not someone who renounces work, but rather someone who renounces attachment to the results of work. So these definitions here violate commonly accepted preconceptions or assumptions of what a yogi and a sannyasi are. Another example is pandita. A pandit is a scholar, someone who knows a great deal. And Krishna redefines a pandit in two places. First, as someone who acts without desire, and then later as someone who sees everyone equally, all beings equally. And so it's a redefinition that upends subverts our idea of what a pundit is. We see the same thing also, of course, in chapter 13, where Arjuna asks Krishna, what is knowledge? And the reason Arjuna asks that is because Arjuna has had the chance to learn so much. He's gained so much knowledge from over the years from great teachers like his grandfather Bhishma, um, from Yudhishthir, Dharmaraj Yudhishthir, from various rishis and sages, from his uncle Vidura, and so on. But in the dark night of the soul, everything he knows isn't able to help him in that moment. So he asks Krishna, what is knowledge? And generally we think that we know what knowledge is. It's something that we've learned and committed to memory. We might be able to repeat it. But Krishna's answer is even more surprising than Arjuna's question. He redefines knowledge as a set of virtues and practices. For example, absence of pride, absence of deceit, not harming, patience, honesty. And he says this is knowledge. Everything else is ajnana, or the absence of knowledge. So here Krishna is redefining knowledge and pointing to what we might call embodied knowledge. In other words, if what we know doesn't transform who we are as a person, then really it's just on the level of thoughts, the level of concepts. And it's really not knowledge at all. It's simply another manifestation. It's simply noise, you can say. It's simply another manifestation of ignorance or a lack of knowledge. We also see another example I want to share with you is the definition of discipline of speech. So when we think of discipline of speech, we might think of the well-known yogic practice of mauna, which is silence, where someone will take a vow of silence for a certain period of time. They won't speak to anyone. But Krishna doesn't adopt that approach. He explains that discipline of speech is the best, the most skillful use of speech. So he says, Anudvega karam vakyam satyam priyahitam chayat. There are 4 gateways that our speech needs to pass through. If it doesn't pass through these gateways, we should remain silent. So the first one is anudvega karam, that our speech doesn't unnecessarily trouble others. And then satyam, it needs to be truthful. Priya, it needs to come from a place of kindness. So in other words, what we say might be true, but if it's not coming from a place of kindness, we don't actually have the right to utter it. And then hitam means beneficial or useful, helpful. So our speech may be true. It might be coming from a place of affection or kindness. But if in that moment it doesn't help, it's not helpful, it's not beneficial, then it's better to remain quiet. So here you see Krishna redefines discipline of speech as the most skillful use of speech. And earlier, he has already defined yoga as skillfulness in action. So not inactivity, not disengagement from life, but the most skillful engagement with life that we can engage in. And then coming back to the theme of yoga, we might think of yoga using Patanjali's famous definition in the Yoga Sutras, yoga chitta vritti nirodha. So yoga is the stilling of the movements of the mind. But Krishna, so in other words, often yoga is part of, so the Yoga Sutras, for example, are very much about disengaging from life. But Krishna integrates his definitions of yoga with direct engagement in everyday life, direct engagement on which you can say, as we've discussed in previous episodes, the field of life, the battlefield of life, and acting, our thoughts, words, and actions being the most skillful they can be. And so he defines yoga as acting skillfully. So even as a genre, the Bhagavad Gita upturns categories. It's a devotional poem, but it's spoken in the middle of a battlefield. It's a war text that teaches transcending the notions of enemy and friend. And it's a text that promises emancipation from the world. How? Through activity in the world. So we'll begin seeing this within chapter 2. And it's worth looking out for how the Gita works in that way, internally as a text, by, you can say, subverting commonly accepted definitions and categories. So with that, we turn now to Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, text 14. But first, let me give you a little bit of very briefly, a summary for context. So Arjuna's in a state of crisis, what we might call a dark night of the soul. And one of the symptoms of a dark night of the soul is intense suffering. So Krishna has been sharing teachings in chapter 2 about the nature of the self, teachings that we find in the ancient Upanishads, like the Katha Upanishad. But let's get real. What about the suffering we experience in a dark night of the soul? How do we manage that? After all, one definition of yoga is dukkha samyoga viyogam. Yoga is breaking our connection with suffering. So, but what does that mean? So Krishna's first instruction, as we'll see, his first instruction on pain is to neither react to it nor to run away from it. Pleasure and pain are both a natural and an inevitable part of being human. And Krishna reminds Arjuna, whatever pain or discomfort he's experiencing is sure to pass. So like heat and cold, these sensations are impermanent and they're born from our engagement with the world. And the wise learn to endure these sensations without being distracted by them. So it's an important teaching. Krishna is making here an implicit distinction between pain and suffering. Pain is an inevitable part of life. We won't have a lot of control of pain, such as, like, for example, the pain of a wound. But what about suffering? Suffering is our mental response to our experience of pain. So let's turn to verse 14. Matra sparshastu kaunteya shitoshna sukha dukada agama paino nityas tangstitikshasva bharata. So you see here shita ushna, shita and ushna. Shita is cold, ushna is heat, and it can also mean winter and summer. And that is juxtaposed with or placed alongside sukha and dukkha, happiness or pleasure and pain. So Krishna says, O son of Kunti, the non-permanent appearance of happiness and distress and their disappearance in due course are like the appearance and disappearance of winter and summer seasons. They arise from sense perception, O scion of Bharata, and one must learn to tolerate them without being disturbed. So Krishna uses the word titikshasva, which is the imperative of the verb titiksh, to endure or to tolerate. So, but what does Krishna mean by tolerate or endure? It's not about gritting your teeth and suffering in silence. Krishna is actually giving a much deeper teaching here, one about overcoming suffering. And this is explained further in the next verse. Krishna explains that a person, the person whom these dualities do not distract or unsettle, that's what he's speaking about. Someone who remains composed in both pain and pleasure. So pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional. It's what we might call the pain of pain. It's when we create a story around our pain and it distracts us. So this reminds me of the many many years ago when I lived for a long period of time, 15 years altogether, in India in a temple monastery. And this is in Mathura, the famed city, the birthplace of Krishna, the speaker of the Bhagavad Gita. So living in a monastery there in the state of Uttar Pradesh in India, in the summer months, it gets incredibly hot, scorching summer months. And most people who are not from India, they they flee at that point. So they either return to the countries they've come from, or they travel up north to the Himalayan mountains and look for a little bit of respite from the heat. So as a young monk, I didn't travel to India with with a lot of financial resources. I went there to study over a long period of time, and so I stayed in the monastery during the summer months, and I learned that the hardest part was not the temperature above 100 degrees Fahrenheit, but the insufferable voice of the mind. The heat is a form of pain, but the constant resistance of the mind to that pain is suffering. The two are not the same. And I learned that while I couldn't control the summer heat, I could control the relentless nagging and dissatisfaction of the mind. So in the summer months, the heat of summer is a little bit like, I don't know, if you turn an oven on full heat and leave it for a couple of hours, and then you open the oven, and that hot air that just blows out into your face, that scorching air is what it's like pretty much in like after about 11, 12 o'clock in the afternoon. No one goes out. You don't even see animals out. You don't see birds. Everything is silent. And if you do go out at that time, you might not make it back. It can have that kind of effect where that heat just enters your body, and you can lose consciousness. So some summers are hotter than others, but it's a difficult thing to bear. But I noticed, so I would be like waiting it out, and my mind continuously speaking, why did I choose to stay here? What a mistake. When is this summer going to end? When is the rainy season finally going to arrive? And there'd be one solitary fan that would be moving slowly. And in India, there are often power cuts. So most of the time, the fan wasn't working. And my mind was just causing so much suffering. And one day I looked around me, and I noticed that the locals were just going about their business. They were experiencing the same heat, so you can say the same pain, but not the same suffering. The heat of the summer, they were not creating a story around that. They were not being distracted by it, whilst I was. And that was a moment of awakening for me. And it helped me understand these two verses from the Gita. Pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. And that's why Krishna advises Arjuna to learn to endure his pain without being distracted, that is, without creating a story around it. So Krishna advises Arjuna, you could say, not to struggle against struggle, but to allow struggle to be. Why? Because struggle is an inevitable part of life. In the end, we can't escape it. So as Krishna explains, we can learn to work with pain more skillfully. And one of the most powerful ways to approach pain is simply to remove our resistance to it and enter a more grateful place, a more graceful place of acceptance. And I mean, usually we're quite quick to react to our pain, and we often view it as an enemy. So we try to banish or suppress it. But what if we looked at our pain in a different way? Say, I don't know, as a little child who needs our nurturing. What if we let go of our resistance to it? Most of the suffering we experience is not wanting things to be the way they are. So, not wanting the world to be the way it is, not wanting others to be the way they are, not wanting myself to be the way I am. And so we're in this war with reality, and that leads to suffering. So the ability to annul suffering is an important part of yoga. And in the Bhagavad Gita, as mentioned, Krishna defines yoga in several ways, and one of them is breaking the connection with suffering. In other words, yoga, or the art of living skillfully, is designed to free us from misery associated with the past, the present, and the future. So, one way to put this is rather than running away from pain, we can make a 180-degree turn in graceful acceptance and enter the heart of the experience. It's the only place where there's peace. It's really a practice of saying yes to life, allowing what is to be. And in yoga, that is embodied in the asana known as shavasana, or the corpse pose. So this is usually a pose, an asana that comes at the end of a yoga session. And if you enter a yoga studio when everyone's doing shavasana, you might actually be, it's easy to be confused. You see everyone lying down on their backs, their eyes closed, their arms spread out, palms facing upwards often. And everyone is, it looks like an easy thing to do, just lie on your back. But the corpse pose may look easy, but its full benefits come with finding complete release. So it's a yoga pose that is extremely beneficial for the psyche. And it's a pose of full surrender to the process of death that actually happens in a dark night of the soul. So it's very connected to existential crisis, or it's a complete process. It's a process of full surrender to life as it is unfolding, without resistance. If the corpse pose could speak, what would it say? It would say, let go of projection and resistance. Let go of your stories and identities in this world. Be your own best friend. Above all, never forget that you're a child of the universe, as much as the stars and the trees. You deserve to be here. You're protected and supported. Die into life. So, one important aspect of this, of releasing ourselves, even temporarily, from the stories that we hold in our, that we hold like burdens that we carry with us wherever we go. So releasing ourselves from this small human story or narrative actually helps us to be more compassionate and kind and affectionate and loving in our relationships. So this is not some kind of method that leads us to withdraw our heart from others or from life itself. And rather, it does the opposite. Because usually, when we're so involved in our story and we take it so seriously, we're not actually seeing the other person who's standing before us. Rather, they become a secondary character in the story that's playing out. So, when we're able to see someone else beyond the story that we're living out, then we come closer to seeing the sacred self. So the word respect, actually, English word respect, comes from respicere, which means to behold. So when we see another person, um, not as a secondary character in our story, so we're able to see someone beyond these stories, then we truly behold them. Then we truly actually respect the person who's before us. It reminds me of a quotation by a quite famous quotation by Rumi, the mystic Rumi. He says, "Beyond wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there." So what he's pointing to is a field of complete non-violence, a field that is beyond the various stories that we're living out. The Gita begins with Dhritarashtra's story. He's lost in his narrative, and he's making these divisions between enemy and friend, um, the sons of Pandu and my own sons. And you, in the opening verse of the Gita, as we saw, his words are filled with fear, attachment, and illusory ego. So this approach, more skillful approach to life, where we don't create stories, we're able to see, we're able to not take our small human stories so seriously, actually allows us to approach life with greater compassion. So this reminds me of there are many wisdom tales or wisdom stories in the texts of India, and also that come down in tradition. And I want to share one with you about an elderly Sankhya teacher. So Sankhya is a system that looks at life more deeply, and there are quite a few Sankhya teachings embedded in the Bhagavad Gita. And one of those teachings is being able to differentiate between the field of perception, kshetra, and kshetragya, the knower of the field. So usually we look for ourselves in the field of perception, but whatever we see there is actually not who we are. Looking for our identity in the field of perception is a little bit like looking for the cameraman in a movie. You can look frame by frame. You can look through a movie. You'll never see the cameraman, because the cameraman stands outside that visual presentation, the movie itself. In the same way, the knower of the field, kshetragya, stands outside, not within the field of perception itself. So there was an elderly Sankhya teacher who grew a little bit tired of his students complaining. And one morning, he sent his student to fetch some salt. And the apprentice returned carrying some salt. And the young man took the handful of salt and placed it in a glass of water. And the teacher said, "Drink it. How does it taste?" And the student spat out the water. He said, "Terrible." So the master chuckled. He then told the young man, "Take another handful of salt and come with me to the lake behind this hermitage." And the two of them walked in silence to the edge of the lake, this large, serene lake, and the apprentice poured his fistful of salt into the water. "Now drink from the lake," the master said. And so the student began drinking, and water dripped down from his chin. "How does it taste?" the master asked. "Do you taste the salt?" And the young man said, "It tastes fresh. I don't taste any salt." And at this, the master sat beside this troubled young man, who actually reminded him so much of himself, and took his hands and said, "The pain of life is pure salt, no more, no less. The amount of pain in our life remains the same, exactly the same. But the amount of pain we taste depends on the container we put the pain into. So when you're in pain, the only thing to do is enlarge your perception of who you are. Stop being a glass become a lake. And the master continued, when we live within the confines of our small human story, we're a tiny glass. Our pain takes on a large significance to the point of becoming unbearable. But when we remember we're spiritual beings, not the lead character of our small story, we experience immediate freedom and spaciousness. We grow from a tiny glass into a large serene lake. And the misfortunes of life no longer affect us in the same way. So we don't generally invite pain in our life, but it comes anyway. And when pain comes uninvited, you can't simply will it away. So Krishna tells Arjuna that pain and pleasure come and go like heat and cold. But if these sensations don't trouble us, then we've truly attained wisdom. So becoming equal in pain and pleasure means becoming a lake. It means remembering who we are. We have the mortal self and we have the mortal story. But we're far more than our mortal self. And therefore, we're also more than our mortal story. When we remember who we are, we're no longer bound by mortal limitations. So Krishna speaking of speaking of such a person who can remain equal in pleasure and pain, he declares, such a wise person is prepared for immortality. Why? It's because such a person transcends the limitations of her own mortal story. And therefore, a Sankhya master is not someone who no longer experiences any difficulties in her life. Rather, a Sankhya master is a person who's no longer troubled by those difficulties. So I want to finish with by inviting you to try an exercise. So in the previous episode with Sienna, we were looking at verse 12 of chapter 2. Sienna asked if there is any simple practice for remembering that we're not this physical body and we're not this human story that we live out and tend to take so seriously. In other words, we're not our thoughts. So I suggested any practice of meditation because it allows us to see the workings of our thoughts as we begin to see, by watching our thoughts, we see that we're not our thoughts. It's a little bit like, I don't know if you've done this as a child or perhaps as an adult. You lie on the grass and look into the sky, and maybe lying in a field and looking into the sky, you see the clouds drifting by, and our thoughts are like clouds that drift by, and the same for our emotions. And as you watch them dispassionately, as soon as we're able to watch them dispassionately, they no longer have the same hold over us. But what I didn't mention, so I think this is a great opportunity to add this to the question that was asked in the previous episode. I want to emphasize that a practice of meditation like that, it can be done in a yoga studio or at home in the morning. But what's really valuable is being able to do it at any time during the day, even just for a few moments, during what we can call the battlefield chaos of life, when we're stuck in a traffic jam and running late, when someone says something impolite or hurtful, when we get into an argument with our partner, whenever we're triggered, do it then. And that's what our yoga training is actually meant for those moments. So I mentioned the corpse pose, Shavasana. See if you can train, if you can, this particular pose, which some of us practice at home or in the yoga studio, see if we can execute that in everyday life without necessarily lying down. So there may be situations like at work, you don't want to lie down on the floor, but it doesn't require that. Remember the essence of the pose, and we can bring our consciousness back to that place of complete acceptance, of not resisting life, allowing things to be, saying yes to life. If corpse pose could speak, what would it say? Let go of projection and resistance. Let go of your stories and identities in this world. Be your own best friend. So the ability to move into corpse pose within the battlefield chaos of life, even just for like 30 seconds, just for a short amount of time, it grounds us. Basically, it grounds us in the ancient Upanishadic teachings on the immortal self, the true self, beyond the physical body and beyond the play of form in our perceptual world. We'll stop here. There are many very important verses filled with wisdom in chapter 2 of the Gita, and I'm really looking forward to the episodes that are that are yet to come. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Simon. I mean, this is definitely a topic that touches all of our lives. We have a question from Colleen. I think this is a really great question. She asks, how do we help others who are suffering, right? Like, I think as practitioners, we have an emphasis on our own suffering, but yeah, how do we, approach that? Maybe we have the desire to assist others who are experiencing suffering.
Right. It's a really good question. Thank you so much. Well, often, and I'm going to relate this to the dark night of the soul, because the dark night of the soul, or a period of existential crisis, is a period where one experiences intense suffering related to time. So fear, lamentation, and confusion, those tend to, we carry those with us throughout life in any event. And at certain times, they become quite pronounced. In a dark night of the soul, they reach the level where it feels unbearable. So it's it is difficult to help someone who's going through something like that, and often there is like an impulse to try and advise, but usually the various things that one might say, and especially the kind of what I might call pop psychology or pop spirituality, has no ability to help someone in a position like that. Things like let it go, choose happiness, those kinds of well-meaning, but it may well come from a good place, but in a dark night of the soul, the other person, it's not that they don't have the will, they simply don't have the power. So one method that is helpful is to be able to sit with someone through an experience like that they're going through, without necessarily trying to pull them out of it, which we may not have the ability to do, but just to spend a few moments being able to share the experience of the other person. At least that needs to be a starting point. Often I think there is like a response where we want to not ready to fully understand what the other person's going through, but we're more easily willing to offer some kind of advice, which may actually not even be all that helpful. So that's one important point that I have found is quite helpful. Another one is to share some of if the person is open to it, to share some of the teachings of a dark night of the soul that Krishna shares with Arjuna. So in relation to a dark night of the soul, for someone to understand, who's going through this, to understand that it's actually a sacred rite of passage. This is not happening because something is wrong with the person. but rather it's a natural part of life. I think that offers some comfort because we tend to think of these experiences of immense suffering and discomfort. We tend to think of them as like severe aberrations. Something must be wrong with our. If we're practicing yoga or on some spiritual path, we might feel let down by that. We might think that um, something's wrong with us. But these experiences are just they really are a natural part of life, and understanding that allows someone or can help someone um, not overly try to resist what's happening, but being able to understand that it's dark night of the soul is a sacred rite of passage. And then, of course, there are some other easier ways that are quite practical, where we can offer support to someone um, in in small practical ways. Help them get their shopping, go take them out for if it's something they're open to. Take them out um, for a walk in the countryside. Just be there for another person in a very real and practical way. And that, I think, is something that sometimes we forget to do. We may have access to many sacred teachings that really have great depth to them, but until we ourselves have actually been through immense suffering or gone through a dark night of the soul, when we do go through a dark night of the soul, then when someone else is going through some great difficulty, we are able to adopt an approach that is much more understanding and much more connected with what they're actually going through. There's a lot to say, but those are a few simple ways of helping someone else that I have found are very practical and that work.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Simon, and thank you, Colleen, for your question. To everyone who joined us today, I have a feeling we're not finished discussing this topic. I think there's really a lot more to unpack here. So thank you again, for guiding us in this discussion, Simon. And we really look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you so much. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you again to everyone who joined us today. If you or someone you know could benefit from these classes, feel free to like this video, share it, subscribe to our YouTube channel. We look forward to seeing you every Monday at 7:30 p.m. and Thursday at 8 a.m. Eastern Time to continue with our discussions on the Bhagavad Gita. See you soon.